The pot roast had been in the oven since 2 o'clock. I remember that detail clearly. The way the smell of it had settled into every room of the house. Warm, familiar, the kind of smell that makes a place feel like home. Candles burned down the center of the long dining table. The lake sat still and dark beyond the window, catching the last pale light of the evening. 12 people I loved were seated around me. It was my 71st birthday. Renee stood up slowly. She lifted her glass, and the table went quiet the way tables do when someone is about to say something warm. I folded my hands. I waited. She smiled. Not the smile I raised. Something thinner. "Mom, I think it's time you understood. You're not in the will. Dad's house belongs to us now. We just thought you should know." The words didn't hit me like a slap. It was quieter than that. It was like a trapdoor opening directly beneath my chair. I sat perfectly still. I did not cry. I did not speak. I looked at my daughter's face and felt something I had never felt in 44 years of loving her. I didn't recognize her. The candles kept burning. Somewhere down the table, a fork scraped a plate, and then came 3 knocks at the front door. But to understand why those 3 knocks mattered more than anything, Renee ever said, "You need to understand who I am and what I spent my entire life believing about family. My name is Dorothy Calloway. I am 71 years old. For 32 years, I was a pediatric nurse at Mercy General. I held other people's children through fevers and fear, and things no parent should have to witness alone. I came home tired in ways that don't wash off in the shower. And then I made dinner and helped with homework and listened to my own children until they fell asleep. Gerald passed 6 years ago. A cardiac event, a Tuesday morning, gone before the ambulance arrived. I built my life around one belief. Family is the one investment that always pays back with interest. I gave without accounting. I loved without conditions. I trusted without contracts. I was wrong, not about love. Love I still believe in completely. I was wrong about who deserved it without question. This story is not about bitterness. I want you to understand that from the beginning. It is about the most important birthday gift I ever gave myself. To understand what Renee thought she was taking from me that night, I have to take you back to a man named Gerald, and a dream we built together out of nothing but love and stubbornness. Gerald was not a man who spoke in large gestures. He was quiet the way deep water is quiet, steady, methodical. He spent 30 years in civil engineering, building bridges and drainage systems, and retaining walls that most people never noticed. He used to say that the best structures are the ones nobody thinks about. They just hold. He loved 2 things above everything else in his life, and a small, weathered lake house on Heron Cove. He found the property on a fishing trip in 1987. Came home sunburned and distracted in a way I recognized. It meant his mind was still somewhere else. That Tuesday night, he spread a hand-drawn map across our kitchen table. His reading glasses slid down his nose. He smoothed the paper with both hands like it was something precious. "Dot," he said quietly, "I want our grandchildren to grow up with mud on their boots and stars overhead. This is the place." I looked at that hand-drawn map for a long time. Then I said, "Okay, Gerald, let's figure out how." It took us 11 years. We skipped vacations. We drove used cars longer than we should have. I picked up extra shifts on holidays. Thanksgiving, Christmas Eve, New Year's. Gerald took weekend consulting work on top of his regular hours. We saved carefully and quietly, the way people do when a dream matters enough to be patient with. In 1998, we purchased the house outright. No mortgage, no partners, no debt. The deed carried both our names. I still remember the drive up that first summer. The windows were down. The air changed the moment we turned off the main road. Pine and lake water, and something cooler underneath. Something that smelled like the absence of every ordinary worry. Gerald reached across and squeezed my hand at the gravel turnoff without saying a word. He didn't need to say anything. When Gerald died, the property transferred to me alone. That had always been the plan, written clearly into our estate documents years before we ever needed them. I was grateful then for his methodical nature, for the way he had thought of everything quietly, without being asked. What followed was mine to carry. Every property tax bill paid from my pension, every insurance renewal, Every repair, the roof in 2019, the water heater in 2020, the dock repairs the following spring. I kept every receipt in the green accordion folder Gerald had labeled in his careful handwriting. Heron House, ours, $47,000 over 6 years. Every cent from my accounts alone. The first autumn after he died, I drove up by myself. I walked down to the dock and I stood there until the sun dropped behind the tree line. The lake was flat and gray and absolutely silent. I cried until there was nothing left inside me. Then I drove home. And the following spring, I had the dock inspected, and the porch repainted, and the gutters cleared, because Gerald had believed in that place. And I was not going to let it fall. I believed with my whole heart that one day that house would hold all of us together. Children, grandchildren, noise and mess and laughter. Exactly the way Gerald had described it over a hand-drawn map on a Tuesday night. And for a while, one beautiful, golden while, it did exactly that. 2 years after Gerald died, I opened Heron House for the whole family, 4th of July week. The first time I had invited everyone at once. Renee and Craig came up with their 2 teenagers. Paul drove in from Columbus with his wife, Laura. 7 people filling rooms that had been quiet for too long. I was nervous the night before they arrived. I stood in the kitchen and wondered if I was doing the right thing. Then I heard gravel crunching in the driveway, and a car door slamming, and my granddaughter's voice cutting through the evening air. And the nervousness just left. The week was everything Gerald had drawn on that map. The smell of charcoal every afternoon, citronella candles burning gold on the porch railing at dusk, my grandchildren shrieking, that pure, unself-conscious shrieking that only children at a lake can produce, as they launched themselves off the dock into the dark, green water below. Gerald's American flag still mounted on the boathouse, snapping crisp and clean in the summer wind exactly where he had put it. I didn't cry once that week. I hadn't expected that. On the 3rd afternoon, I was standing in the kitchen doorway, watching the kids on the dock. I didn't hear Renee come up beside me. She put her arm around my shoulder and we stood there together without speaking for a moment. Then she said, "Dad would have loved every single second of this, Mom." I leaned into her shoulder, just slightly, just for a moment. The grief and the gratitude existed in the same breath, and I let them both be there without trying to separate them. That was my daughter. That was the woman I had raised. The last evening, after the grandchildren were asleep inside, the 4 adults sat on the porch in the dark. Nobody felt the need to fill the silence. The lake was perfectly still. Lightning bugs rose slowly from the tree line, blinking soft and steady in the warm night air. I thought, Gerald was right. This is exactly what he meant. Looking back, I wish I could freeze every one of us right there on that porch. Because that was the last summer we were simply a family. The changes started small, the way most dangerous things do. A comment here, a suggestion there, each one reasonable enough on its own. But I should have been paying closer attention. The following spring, Renee called on a Sunday afternoon. Her voice was warm, concerned, the voice she used when she wanted something to sound like caring. "Mom, managing that house alone is a lot of stress, especially at your age. Craig and I were talking and we'd like to help. Let us handle the scheduling, who visits when, the repairs, communicating with the handyman. You shouldn't have to carry all of that." I was touched. I want to be honest about that. It felt like love. I said, yes. I told myself this is what families do. They share the weight. I told myself Renee was simply growing into the kind of daughter Gerald would have been proud of. I hung up the phone feeling grateful. I rationalized it completely, every last bit of it. That was the first thing I gave away without realizing I was giving it. The following summer, I drove up to Heron House in late June. I came around the bend in the gravel path, and I stopped walking. The dock was gone. Not gone, replaced. New composite boards, gray and uniform. A new metal railing. A different shape, a different color, a different everything. Craig was standing at the edge of it with a can of soda, looking pleased. "Took care of the dock for you," he said. "Old one was a liability. This one's much safer." I stood at the top of the path and looked at where Gerald's dock used to be. Gerald had built that dock by hand. 2 weekends in the summer of 1999. I remembered him out there with his level and his sawhorses, sunburned and deliberate, working through the heat because he wanted to do it himself. I remembered the sound of the hammer carrying across the water. I stood very still. Then I walked down and stepped onto the new dock. It didn't move beneath my feet the way the old one had. It was solid and gray and completely unfamiliar. I said nothing. I told myself the new dock was safer. I told myself Craig had meant well. I told myself Gerald would have wanted something sturdier eventually anyway. But I noticed very clearly that no one had asked me. By autumn of that same year, I realized my name was missing. Renee had created an email chain for what she called Heron House scheduling. I had never been added to it. I discovered this only because Paul mentioned something about a message she'd sent, and I had no idea what he was referring to. I brought it up at Thanksgiving. Calmly. Directly. Renee, I'm not on the email chain for the house. I'd like to be included. She laughed, light and easy the way you laugh at something small. Mom, we didn't want to clutter your inbox. You don't need to worry about the details anymore. I set down my fork. It's my house, Renee. I want to be included. She patted my hand. Then she turned to Craig and asked if he wanted more stuffing. Craig said yes and started talking about the football game. The moment closed around my words like water closing over a stone. 60 seconds. That's all it took. I sat with my untouched pie and told myself she meant well. I told myself I was being oversensitive. I told myself families evolve and roles shift, and this was simply what that looked like. But something stiffened inside me that afternoon. Something quiet and certain. And it did not soften again. In January, my property tax bill arrived. I opened the envelope at the kitchen table the way I always did, reading through the details line by line. Something stopped me. The billing contact had been changed. An account I didn't recognize. I called the county assessor's office that same morning. The woman on the phone was polite and straightforward. A billing contact update had been filed the previous October. The primary contact listed was Craig Marsh. I sat with the phone in my hand for a moment. Then I called Renee. She was breezy, unbothered. Craig just streamlined things, Mom. He handles all our finances. It made sense to route it through him. I would like it changed back, I said. Today if possible. I'll look into it, she said. I waited 3 weeks. Nothing changed. Every payment for that property had come from my accounts, every tax, every insurance renewal, every repair bill for 6 years, every single one. And now my name had been quietly moved aside on my own property record, and my daughter was telling me she would look into it. I told myself it was administrative, a small thing. A clerical matter easily fixed. I told myself that right up until I stopped believing it. Easter arrived cold and bright. We gathered at Renee and Craig's house, 16 around 2 pushed-together tables, ham and rolls and the good china Renee only used for holidays. I sat near the end, beside Paul's wife Laura, and I was doing fine. Then Craig's voice rose above the table noise, aimed directly at Paul. We've got big plans for Heron House, looking into some upgrades, things that will really increase the property value when the time comes. Paul looked at me. I looked at Craig. Craig held my gaze without blinking, without apology, without the smallest flicker of awareness that he had said something wrong. Renee reached for the bread basket. Someone passed the rolls. I smiled. I excused myself. I walked down the hallway to the bathroom and closed the door and stood in front of the mirror. 4 minutes. I know because I counted. They were speaking about my husband's house as if I was already gone, as if I were a name on a plaque, a former resident, a woman whose chapter had already ended. I looked at my reflection for a long time. I left Easter telling myself I had misread it, that I was being sensitive, that they meant well. I believed that right up until the night of my 71st birthday, when Renee looked me in the eye across my own dinner table and removed every last doubt. I chose Heron House for my birthday dinner. I always did. It was my tradition, my preference, the place where I felt Gerald closest. I cooked the pot roast myself. I set the table with his mother's china. I lit the good candles and put fresh flowers in the blue pitcher by the window. 12 people around that table, Renee and Craig, Paul and Laura, 4 grandchildren, Barbara, my closest friend for 30 years, seated to my left. I had made the place cards by hand. Dinner was warm and easy. The grandchildren were loud in the good way. Paul told a story that made everyone laugh. Barbara touched my arm and said the roast was perfect. Then the plates were cleared. Renee stood up. I thought she was going to make a toast. I folded my hands in my lap and smiled and waited. She reached into the bag beside her chair and placed a document on the table in front of me. Several pages, printed and stapled. I could see 2 signatures at the bottom of the last page before I read a single word. Renee's signature, Craig's signature. My signature line was blank. Craig and I spoke with an attorney, Renee said. Her voice was measured, prepared. Given your age, Mom, and the complexity of managing an estate property, he advised that the cleanest solution would be for you to deed Heron House to us now, as an early inheritance. It avoids probate complications down the road. She paused, then she said it. You're not in the will, Mom. Dad left this to the family, not just to you. We just thought tonight was a good time to make things official. The room went silent in a way I had never felt before. My grandchildren looked at the tablecloth. Paul stared at his sister with an expression I had never seen on his face. Barbara's hand moved across the table and rested on top of mine. I looked at the document. I looked at Renee's face. I felt no rage. That surprised me even in that moment. What I felt was colder and cleaner than rage. It was the feeling of something finally coming into focus after years of being slightly blurred. She had not been gradually overstepping. She had been building toward this table. This document, this audience, 3 years of small moves, and this was always where they were pointing. But the document was built on a lie. Gerald had left Heron House to me. Solely, legally, completely. My name was the only name on that deed. Renee's attorney, whoever he was, had either been misled or had simply told her what she wanted to hear. And she did not know what I had done 8 days earlier. I closed my eyes, just for a moment. Then I opened them, folded my hands on top of the document, and said nothing. 3 seconds passed. 3 measured knocks landed on the front door. I want to tell you about those 8 days. Because that is where this story actually turned. Not at the dinner table. Not when Renee spoke. 8 days before my birthday. I finally stopped grieving and started thinking. I woke at 5 in the morning the day after Easter. The room was still dark. I lay there for a moment, looking at the ceiling, and I understood that something had changed in the night. Not dramatically. Not with any particular feeling attached to it. Something had simply finished shifting, the way a bone sets after a break, quietly, permanently. I got up, made coffee, and went to the closet. Gerald's green accordion folder was exactly where it had always been, on the shelf above the winter coats. I carried it to the kitchen table and opened it. The original deed, the estate documents, 6 years of property tax records, every receipt for every repair, every insurance payment, every maintenance bill I had paid since the day Gerald died, $47,212. My money, my accounts, my name on every check. I photographed every page with my phone, every single one. Then I called Margaret Chen. I had used Margaret years before when I updated my own will. She was methodical and unhurried in a way that inspired complete confidence. The kind of lawyer who reads everything twice before she speaks. Who says little until she is absolutely certain. She had an opening that afternoon. I sat across from her desk and told her everything. The billing contact change filed without my knowledge. The email chain I had been quietly removed from. Craig's announcement at Easter, performed in front of witnesses. My concern that they were constructing a paper trail of management and involvement that could one day be used to challenge my ownership. Margaret listened without interrupting. She reviewed every document I had brought. Then she looked up. My ownership, she told me, was airtight. But there was one proactive step I could take. One move that would end this before it ever reached a courtroom or a conference table or another dinner conversation. I told her to proceed without hesitation. I drove home, made tea, sat on the porch in the April chill and watched the lake. I was not afraid anymore. I was prepared. So when those 3 knocks came at my birthday dinner, I was not surprised. I was ready. And what happened next is something I will carry with me for the rest of my life. Margaret had been thorough in the way only truly careful people are. She had reviewed everything I brought her. The deed, the estate documents, 23 years of financial records showing my sole contribution to that property. Every tax payment, every insurance renewal, every repair invoice going back to the year Gerald and I first bought it together. She spread the documents across her desk and read each one without rushing. Then she told me what she recommended, a living trust. The Dorothy G. Calloway Living Trust, with me as sole trustee and lifetime beneficiary. Paul and a land conservation organization I had always admired would serve as successor beneficiaries after my death. Any challenge to the trust, any legal action initiated by a beneficiary against the trust or its trustee, would result in that person's automatic removal from succession. The documents were ready in 6 days. I signed on a Thursday afternoon at Margaret's desk, with her witness and her notary present. Margaret arranged for her associate, Daniel Reyes, to deliver the formal trust notification to me at a pre-arranged time and location. He was young, precise, and professional, exactly what the moment required. I chose the time myself. 7:45 in the evening. My birthday. I set the dinner deliberately. Herrenhaus, my tradition. My kitchen, my pot roast, Gerald's mother's china, the good candles lit before anyone arrived. I invited everyone I always invited. Paul and Laura, the grandchildren, Barbara, Renee and Craig. I had watched Renee prepare for her moment for 3 years. I knew how she thought. I knew she would not be able to resist the stage I had set. A family gathered, an audience assembled, a mother who appeared to suspect nothing. It was everything she had been waiting for. I carried the pot roast to the table that evening and felt something I hadn't felt in years. Complete peace. I had not felt that calm in that house since Gerald was alive. When Renee stood up after dinner, I was ready. When she placed the document in front of me, I let her speak. I let her finish every word. I sat with my hands folded and my face composed, and I listened to my daughter tell me, in front of 12 people who loved me, that I had no claim to the home I had built and maintained and wept over and fought to keep standing. I let her finish. Then came the knocks. I excused myself quietly. I walked to the front door and opened it. Daniel Reyes stood on the porch in a dark coat, briefcase in hand. He introduced himself, handed me a sealed envelope, and confirmed the delivery. I thanked him. I closed the door. I walked back to the table. I set the envelope down directly in front of Renee's document. I opened it myself, smoothed the pages flat, and looked around the table. I'd like to share something as well. I read the key passage aloud. That Herrenhaus had been placed into a fully executed living trust in my name alone, effective 4 days prior. That the trust contained a legal challenge clause. That any attempt to claim or transfer the property outside the terms of the trust was legally void. I set the pages down. The room was completely silent. I watched Renee's face move through confusion, then disbelief, then something quieter and colder underneath both. I recognized it. It was the moment a person understands that the move they planned for years has already been answered. Renee called 11 times that night. I answered once. I said, "I love you, Renee. Good night." Then I set the phone face down on the nightstand and did not pick it up again. Craig sent 2 emails to Margaret's office. Vague, inflated, the kind of legal-sounding language people use when they want to seem more prepared than they are. Margaret responded once. A single paragraph. I was told the matter was closed. Renee arrived at Herrenhaus the following morning unannounced. I opened the door. I offered coffee. I was warm and I was final, and those 2 things can exist in the same posture if you've had enough practice. She moved through every stage I had anticipated. The outrage first. "You did this on purpose." Then the bargaining, her voice fraying at the edges. "We were just trying to help you, Mom. We were worried about you." And finally something that sat below all of it. Fragile, uncertain. The first trembling outline of genuine accountability. I did not argue with any of it. I offered more coffee. Paul called that evening. His voice was quiet and careful. "Mom," he said, "I had no idea she had gone that far. I'm so sorry I didn't see it." I told him he had nothing to apologize for. I meant it. 1 week after the birthday dinner, I called Renee. I asked her to come to Heron House alone. No Craig, no children. Just the two of us and the porch and the lake and whatever needed to be said between a mother and her daughter. She came. We sat with our coffee and I spoke first. I told her I understood ambition. I told her I understood fear. The fear of being left out, of watching something slip away, of uncertainty about what comes next. Those are human fears. I did not dismiss them. I told her I did not hate her. I told her I grieved the version of her who had once stood in this same doorway and said that her father would have loved every second of this. Then I told her what was true and what was permanent. The trust would not be revisited. It would not be negotiated. Craig was not welcome at Heron House. Not this summer, not the next, until she could show me something genuine had changed in the way he spoke about things that did not belong to him. I looked at her directly. I have loved you since before you took your first breath, Renee. But love is not the same as permission. And it is not the same as surrender, she cried. I let her cry. I did not reach across. I did not soften the silence with reassurance the way I had done her entire life. I held my coffee cup and looked out at the lake, the same water Gerald had pointed to over a hand-drawn map on a Tuesday night in 1987. And I let my boundary stand exactly where I had placed it, without apology. That was 14 months ago. And I want to tell you where I am now. Because where I am now is the part of this story that matters most. 14 months later, I live at Heron House full-time. It was not a difficult decision. It was, in fact, the easiest decision I made through all of this. I sold the house in town quietly and without ceremony. I packed what mattered and I drove north on a Thursday morning in September with the windows down, and when I turned onto the gravel path and heard the tires on the familiar stones, something in my chest settled in a way it hadn't in years. I was home. My mornings begin before sunrise. I make coffee in Gerald's old percolator. I kept it, even though it takes longer, and I carry it down to the dock. The composite boards are gray and cold under my feet in the early hours. I have made my peace with them. The view they lead to is exactly the same as it always was. The loons call from somewhere across the water, low and haunting. And I sit with my coffee, and I let the morning come at its own pace. I planted a vegetable garden along the south fence in April. Tomatoes, green beans, 2 rows of herbs. Gerald would have been out there every morning checking the progress. He would have had opinions about the spacing. I can hear exactly what he would have said, and it makes me smile more than it makes me sad. Paul brings his family every July. The grandchildren have claimed the dock as their sovereign territory, and I have relinquished it completely and gladly. The shrieking that carries across the water on those afternoons is the best sound I know. Barbara comes twice a year. We walk the shoreline in the evenings and talk the way women talk when they have known each other long enough to skip the parts that don't matter. Renee calls occasionally. Our conversations are shorter than they used to be. They are more honest than they have ever been. It is not what I imagined for us. It may yet become something. I hold that possibility without pressure. Craig has not returned to this property. I do not expect that to change. Some mornings I sit in Gerald's chair on the porch and I talk to him. I tell him the dock has a new railing, but the view is the same. I tell him the loons are still here. I tell him I finally learned to stop giving the house away one quiet extension session at a time. I think he would have caught it sooner than I did. That sounds right for him. There are things I know now that I wish I had understood earlier. I offer them to you simply, the way one woman offers another. A cup of something warm. Loving your family should never require surrendering what you built with your life. Generosity is a gift you choose to give. It is not a debt you are required to keep paying. What we build with sacrifice deserves to be protected. Most of all from the people who never helped carry it. Dignity is not something others grant you. It is something you reclaim, quietly, one decision at a time, and the greatest thing I ever learned was not how to give. It was finally, at 71 years old, learning how to keep.